And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, would political fallout with the city planning office spell the end for my vertigo-inducing playground idea? And will my housebound cat be sufficiently motivated to start feasting on diseased backyard vermin? And now, the podcast host who introduces diseased vermin to his friend, the backyard garden hose, Pete Dominic.
That is right. I always do that, Pete Co. You got it. You nailed it, as you always do, my friend. One of the more bizarre openings in the history of the show, which is why I love you. You always keep us on our toes, Pete Co's. And hello, everybody. Hi, how are you? Today's show welcomes Wajahat Ali, fresh off his tour. I mean, he's still out there promoting his awesome new book. And Professor Eric Segall joins us to talk about the decision made at the Supreme Court about Alabama's racist redistricting. Not good. Anyway, Waj and Segall both join me today. Great conversations with both of them, and a question to start. Have you ever heard of anybody putting maple syrup on their home fries or their hash browns, their breakfast potato selection? Have you heard of that? Are you that person? We'll get into that later on. Well, folks, it's the middle of the week. I'm happy to have you joining me. I'm going to have to do something about tomorrow's hangout. Either do it earlier or later, because there's a Board of Education meeting that I plan to attend in my community. They always have them on Thursdays, about once a month, and I've missed the last two. I've got to show up and represent tomorrow. So we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll do it Friday. Maybe we'll do it Saturday. I don't know, but we will do it, a hangout this week, because I think I need it as bad as you do, and I always love them so much. So stay tuned. To all of you who are paid subscribers, you'll get an email letting you know when it is, and I hope to see you there. And those of you who aren't, what are you waiting for? Sign up now, would you? Will you? Please go to standupwithpete.com, standupwithpete.com, or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You can sign up and you can support this podcast because it's my full-time job and you are my boss. So sign up and be a subscriber, and every day I'll get two of the smartest people I can find, brand new guests, introducing brand new guests every week, and some of your favorite regulars that join me like once a month or so. And so I always do the news, too. I recap yesterday's news, and I usually post it by 2 a.m., so tell your friends, promote the podcast, give it a review, and here we go. Time for the last 24... All right, well, let me start with a fun clip from an actor who I have grown to love over the years. Everybody probably is familiar with him at this point because he's been in so many things. And now he is one of the main stars of this show, Succession, which I guess, I don't know, they've had several seasons. I just got HBO Max and started watching it, so I'm on season 1 of Succession, and I'm enjoying it. It's nice to have a show again. It's been a long time, and by a long time I mean since I binged Reacher from Friday night into Saturday. I watched, oh my god, I loved Reacher. It's on Amazon Prime, and now I got the HBO Max for a little while. I'm trying that out, and so I'm watching Succession. So I love this Brian Cox, and Brian Cox was on John Heilman's podcast. I saw this clip at the Recount, who sponsors it, and I thought it would be a fun way to just start. I don't think it really needs much of a setup. Here he is, the Scottish actor Brian Cox.
At the same time in history, we have two idiots, Johnson in the UK and Trump here, you know, yeah. and we have these incredible fools who some people refuse to see through. In my country, it's because of feudalism. We cannot throw off the yoke of feudalism. And we will always trust somebody who went to a public school and seems to have had a better education than us. And that's one of those things that I thought we were going to drift away from in the 1960s, and we haven't. We did for a while. Social mobility was great between 1960 and 1972, yes, but then it reverted back to its all everybody in their place. In America, it's a political system which is weary. You know, it's a weary system. It doesn't know whether it's on its, no, I won't say it, but it doesn't know whether it's on its, it doesn't know whether it's on its arse or its elbow. You know, it really doesn't.
Brian Cox, I think he meant private school, not public school. I think he misspoke there, but great commentary. I love that. Thought you might as well. Well, things continue to look pretty bad in Republican-led states when it comes for cancel culture and censorship and book banning, and you can't say gay. They're actually striking words. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis voicing his support for a bill that would prohibit the discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity in the state's primary schools. And that is absurd in 2022. But yet it's exactly what he is voicing support for. Here is a little bit of his commentary about this.
Anything should be age appropriate. And I think some would say even these young kids, elementary school kids, I think that's wrong to have them being involved with things that aren't age appropriate. And so, I haven't looked at any particulars of anything, but I do think you've seen instances in which kids are encouraged to be, doing stuff with like a gender ideology. And I think the parents really do need to be involved in that. And so that goes to, excuse me. So we have had reports where people in schools, and I think that's why they're getting at, where people have been, not only the districts, but individual instances of where that has been encouraged not to be shared with parents. And so that, I think most parents, they want to know what's going on in the schools. They want to make sure that everything is age appropriate. And look, at the end of the day, my goal is to educate kids on the subjects, math, reading, science, all the things that are so important. I don't want the schools to kind of be a playground for ideological disputes or to try to inject.
All right, of course, this is an insane attempt. It's a very dangerous thing, what is happening. Kids will die of suicide as a result. Jason Buttigieg, Pete Buttigieg's husband, tweeted that not too long ago. He said, "You're purposely making your state a harder place for LGBTQ kids to survive." In a national survey, 42% of LGBTQ youth seriously considered attempting suicide last year. Now they can't talk to their teachers. And what about those teachers and adults in the schools who identify as gay? They can't talk about their families. And this is about parental rights. Whose parental rights? What about the parental rights of gay people or people who have gay sons or daughters who identify as gay? 4 other states, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Mississippi, have laws similar to the proposed Florida measure. And 3 other states, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Montana, passed bills last year that would allow parents to opt students out of any lessons or coursework that even mention sexual orientation or gender identity, because somehow pretending it doesn't exist is going to make it easier. At the same time, 7 states, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Illinois, Nevada, New Jersey, and Oregon, have laws that require the curriculum to be inclusive of LGBTQ people, according to this advocacy group called GLSEN. And make no mistake, they're coming to the states that you live in, if they haven't already, to try to pass similar agendas, similar bills, get Republicans elected to the state house as well as the Board of Education. You must be vigilant and confront these people wherever they post, wherever they speak. You've got to show up and support those who will. Organize locally, because if this isn't you or your kid, it's somebody else's, and it's awful. Just awful. Here is Jen Psaki at the White House addressing this yesterday.
And today, conservative politicians in Florida rejected those basic values by advancing legislation that is designed to target and attack the kids who need the support the most. Kids from the LGBTQI plus community who are already vulnerable to bullying. And we've seen that in study after study, and violence just for being themselves and just for being who they are. Make no mistake, this is not an isolated action in Florida. Across the country, we're seeing Republican leaders taking action to regulate what students can or cannot read, what they can or cannot learn, and most troubling, who they can or cannot be. This is who these kids are. And these legislators are trying to make it harder for them to be who they are. So we felt it was important to speak out against this action.
All right, there you go, Jen Psaki at the White House yesterday. I thought she handled that really well. That was a well-prepared response, and I appreciate the White House advocating for and speaking out vociferously for LGBT youth. And speaking of mental health and youth, the Surgeon General, General Vivek Murthy, who is also a guy who looks exactly like the brown version of the white Ezra Klein. Just if you haven't ever Googled Vivek Murthy and Ezra Klein, the resemblance is so uncanny that it's eerie. Anyway, I wanted to play like 3 minutes of his opening statement. He's not the most riveting speaker, but he's real smart and thoughtful, in my opinion. And I thought it was really important what he said about how the pandemic has had a devastating impact on the mental health of America's young people. So I just want to include that whole statement. And if it's boring or something, fast forward through it. But I liked listening to this, and that's how I editorially pick things. If I stop paying attention, then I cut it there, or I find it boring. I thought this is important and interesting, and I wanted to share it with you. Here is the Surgeon General testifying yesterday.
Over the next few years, my children and millions of their peers will start down the path to adulthood. Each of their paths will be different. All will be filled with challenges along the way. But it's these challenges that I want to talk to you about today, because I'm deeply concerned as a parent and as a doctor that the obstacles this generation of young people face are unprecedented and uniquely hard to navigate, and the impact that's having on their mental health is devastating. There are a number of long-standing preventable factors that are driving this crisis. The recent ubiquity of technology platforms, especially social media platforms, have had harmful effects on many children. And meanwhile, progress on the issues that will determine the world this generation will inherit, like economic inequality, climate change, racial injustice, LGBTQ rights, the opioid epidemic, and gun violence, feels too slow. It's undercutting the fundamental American promise for many of our children, their hope in the possibility of a better future.
All right, I don't know what's going on during his testimony yesterday at the Senate committee, but there's like somebody's got a mic open, and it actually gets a little bit worse later on, and I think somebody finally turns it off. But sorry if that's a little annoying. I want to let him finish because I think what he's saying is important.
All of these factors affecting youth mental health were true before the COVID-19 pandemic, but the last 2 years have dramatically changed young people's experiences at home, at school, and in their communities. It's not just the unfathomable number of deaths or the instability, it's also the pervasive sense of uncertainty and the nagging sense of fear. It's the isolation from loved ones, from friends, and from communities at a moment where human support systems are irreplaceable and more needed than ever before.
I mean, are you serious? We're trying to listen to the Surgeon General. I'm disrespectful. I think they got it.
But at the heart of our youth mental health crisis is a pervasive stigma that tells young people they should be embarrassed if they are struggling with depression, anxiety, stress, or loneliness. It makes a human condition feel inhuman. But, Senators, we are on the verge of beating back one public health crisis in COVID-19 only to see another grow in its place. In 2019, the year before the pandemic, 1 in 3 high school students reported feeling persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, up 40% from a decade prior. From 2011 to 2015, youth psychiatric visits to emergency departments for depression, anxiety, and behavioral challenges increased by 28%. Between 2007 and 2018, suicide rates among youth aged 10 to 24 increased by 57%. A total of 65,026 young people lost. As devastating as these numbers are, the real tragedy is that we are failing as a country to adequately respond to them. Even before the pandemic, we were not doing enough to provide adequate care and treatment options in every community. And COVID-19 has only made that disparity worse.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Surgeon General. And I hope you appreciated that. It's really important, something I should probably talk a lot more about here on the show. And it's always helpful to remind me that I might be missing an issue. You know, my daughters have had it hasn't been that bad for them. They're adolescents. They're kind of in a sweet spot in the grades that they were in and the kind of seminal events that they missed or didn't miss. And so I think they've been okay. And frankly, they preferred staying home. They liked remote school when it happened last year, but they're back. And I think the masks are going to be gone soon. And hopefully we're going to be out of the worst parts of this soon. Now let's move on to a little politics. You've probably heard about the situation or this new phrase, legitimate political discourse, the 3 words that have sparked a real rift among Republicans now. Use of the phrase in connection with the Capitol insurrection has led to days of attempted political cleanup over Republican Party resolution censuring two Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and man with no neck whatsoever, seemingly, just a bunch of chins, had to answer this yesterday.
Do you have confidence in her, Ronna McDaniel, as chairwoman of the committee?
I do, but the issue is whether or not the RNC should be sort of singling out members of our party who may have different views from the majority. That's not the job of the RNC.
All right, well, there's some infighting in the Republican Party, there's no doubt. But as I've been thinking and saying, I don't know what you think, I'd love to hear from you on it. Until the right-wing media talkers, your Glenn Becks, your Sean Hannity's, obviously Tucker Carlson, your Ben Shapiro's, Don Bongino's, and whoever else, the rest of the most popular, influential talkers, podcasters, YouTubers, and obviously Fox Newsers and other cable newsers are saying that is what matters. Listen to them if you want to know the status of the Republican Party. You just have to pay loose attention to any of them because they're mostly saying the same shit. Anyway, Jen Psaki was asked about the whole legitimate political discourse thing yesterday as well. I want to let her weigh in here.
But your reaction to the RNC declaring what happened on January 6th as legitimate political discourse, and Democrats on the Hill today are being very vocal about this. Hakeem Jeffries says the C in RNC stands for cult. Does the White House agree with that?
Well, I think it's clear to Americans that what happened on January 6th was not legitimate political discourse. Storming the Capitol in an attempt to halt the peaceful transition of power is not legitimate political discourse. Neither is attacking and injuring over 140 police officers, smashing windows and defiling offices. It's telling to all of us that some leading Republicans have rejected that characterization, including the former president's national security advisor and the chief of staff to the former vice president, who, as he put it, had a front row seat that day, including as rioters chanted for the former vice president to be hanged. So, again, we certainly reject the notion that that was legitimate political discourse, as we think a large number of Americans would as well.
All right, well, you heard the reporter reference Hakeem Jeffries, and since he was referenced, I'll give you some context. Here is exactly what Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries said, and I remember a time when we never would have used this kind of language. I certainly wouldn't have supported it, but I actually agree with this. I do think the Republican Party has become a cult. I think that is actually an accurate thing to say. If you don't, I would love to hear from you and try to understand your point of view on it. But here's Hakeem Jeffries yesterday. I can't even believe this is where we're at, but we are.
You know, the C in RNC doesn't stand for committee. It stands for cult. It's not the Republican National Committee. It's the Republican National Cult. That is the only way you can explain how the grand old party would come to the conclusion that people who engaged in rampant mob violence, urinated, defecated, desecrated the Capitol, brutally beat up police officers, seriously injured more than 140. Police officers lost their lives as a result of the events of January 6th. And the cult says it's legitimate political discourse. They've come to that conclusion because they continue to bend the knee twice impeached so-called President Donald Trump.
All right, Hakeem Jeffries is saying the C in RNC stands for cult, and I don't disagree. Sorry. Well, let's move on. Democratic lawmakers yesterday said they're not giving up on extending the child tax credit. They're hoping to win over Senator Joe Manchin again, a key holdout, and they held a news conference as part of the Biden administration's outreach campaign, Senate Democrats, to get millions of families to file their taxes so they can receive the second half of payments from the expanded child tax credit. That might be you. It's helped to keep millions of families across the country afloat during the pandemic. And here is Senator Raphael Warnock pointing out during this news conference just why it's so important.
Because when ordinary folks have a few extra dollars in a month, they buy, extravagant things like a Coke for their kid, food. They put their kids in extracurricular activities. They do things that support and strengthen our economy.
Then Senator Warnock pointed to his own personal experience in life to illustrate the benefit of these types of public programs.
Most poor people in America are children. And I was one of those kids. I grew up in public housing, and I would not be standing here in the United States Senate if it weren't for good federal public policy. I'm an upward bound kid. Pell Grants, Head Start. This gives all of our kids a head start. It's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do for these families and our economy.
Ooh, I love that guy, Raphael Warnock, pointing to the importance of the child tax credit and keeping that in the bill. File your taxes and get that benefit, folks. All right, now I want to move on to what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. Really interesting to try to pay attention to what's happening there. I'll give you some of the headlines. France says Putin promised no new military initiatives near Ukraine in talks with Macron. So I feel like that's a good news headline. But here is the Secretary General of NATO holding a press conference yesterday, trying to point to who he thinks the aggressor is. This is Jens Stoltenberg.
First of all, there is no doubt who is the aggressor. Russia has occupied part of Ukraine, Crimea, annexed that, and they control parts of eastern Ukraine, Donbass, through the separatists that they support and control. And then they have built up with more than 100,000 combat-ready troops, very much advanced weapon systems, artillery, missiles, fighter jets, and so on, and the military build-up continues. So what we have done is to provide support to Ukraine, and Ukraine is the victim of aggression, and of course Ukraine has the right to self-defense. That's enshrined in the UN Charter, and NATO allies provide Ukraine with help to uphold that right.
All right, there you go. Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg. All right, he's Norwegian. He was the Prime Minister of Norway when that horrible shooting happened. I know that because I watched that stupid Netflix about it, the Norwegian shooting. Wasn't that bad, but what a morbid movie and story. And all right, well, moving on. One more clip I want to play for you, and I referenced some of the comments made by Elie Mystal on this MSNBC clip on Joy Reid's show. It's Elie Mystal. He is the justice correspondent for The Nation magazine, a friend of mine, friend of the show, even though I can't seem to get him back on the show. I'm working on it, and I always want to play clips of him, and you should read all his articles and subscribe. Follow him on Twitter. Just one of the most brilliant people out there, commentators. And he's just so passionate as well. So I referenced this with my conversation with Eric Segall, so I thought I'd play it for you here.
You know, Elie, I'm going to let you weigh in here because I feel like this is the new Plessy court. They've made it very clear that the stare decisis thing are just words to them. They don't really care about precedent. They're going to stomp all over a precedent because they have a political agenda. And it is the same political agenda as Donald Trump and right-wingers, and they're just going to do it, and they don't really care.
Yeah, Joy, I don't know what to tell people. This is no longer like Jim Crow. This is Jim Crow. This is what the court did back during the Jim Crow era. My mother is 70 years old. She was born in 1950, more than 70 years old, born in 1950 in Mississippi. She has lived through this, and it's happening again, and I can't seem to get people, including Democrats, to care. Because at the end of the day, all the court has to do, all the Supreme Court has to do is refuse to enforce the 15th Amendment and apply it against the states. We've had laws before. We had the Civil Rights Act of 1870, which made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race in voting. Did it matter? No, not when conservatives controlled the court. We had a law in the Civil Rights Act of 1875 that made it illegal to discriminate against people in public accommodations. Did it matter? No, not when you let conservatives control the Supreme Court. So as long as you let conservatives control the third branch of government, nothing stops. Nothing happens. Only the racism is allowed to continue. That's what Brett Kavanaugh did. That's what Neil Gorsuch did, and the rest of the five of them. And don't give any credit to your boy John Roberts.
Oh, no, don't give any credit to him. I am sorry that got cut off. But in Elie Mystal's latest article in Nation magazine, he traces John Roberts' fight against voting rights from when Reagan appointed him, because Reagan didn't like it either, all the way up until now, and it's a really good article. All right, well, that's all the audio I've got for you, but now I've got headlines. I've got rapid-fire headlines. It's time for the news dump. Pete Coe has a jingle for us again. Let's go. See what he's got.
Skier slams a slalom gate, may have lost his junk. Let's see his new camel toe on today's news dump.
Yes, that is a request I made because listener, subscriber Benny Alexander shared a clip where a skier ran into a gate and it hit him right in the nuts. And the commentary from the announcer is unbelievable. You got to hear it. I'm actually going to play more audio for you right here in the news dump because I requested that one after Benny showed me about this story and shared the audio with me, suggested I use it. I then said, this might be a good jingle, requested it, and there you have it. That's how the sausage is made here on Stand Up. But here's the audio from the announcer after seeing this skier hit a gate right between the legs.
Oh, the gate to the groin for Yannick Bertrand, and you could hear it. And if you're a man, you could feel it. Wow, watch this again. Oh, the Frenchman. Oh, monsieur. Wow, the boys took a beating on that one. That guy needs a hug.
I mean, I don't know who that ballsy announcer was, but it was a little bit too lighthearted for that. I mean, it was hilarious and entertaining. I don't know if it was appropriate for him to be making that commentary. I certainly wouldn't want it to be made about me if I were that skier. Oh, my God. Anyway, that is what the news dump was about. And now it's time to get to more important stories, shall we? Okay, let's start with this very important story. The House has approved a short-term bill averting a federal shutdown. They approved federal legislation financing federal agencies for another month. The latest emblem of Congress's persistent inability to finish its budget work on time, according to the writer phrasing it at abcnews.com. Canada's COVID-19 protests are now threatening border trade between Canada and the U.S. Canadian lawmakers are expressing increasing worry about the economic effects of the disruptive demonstrations. The blockade at the Ambassador Bridge between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, prevented traffic from entering Canada while some U.S.-bound traffic was still moving. And it's just a complete mess up there. If you want to know more, listen to my conversation with Canadian Carlos Scro yesterday's show. Really important story to continue watching. The Republicans in the Virginia House have defeated a measure that would have let voters decide whether to strip legally outdated language prohibiting gay marriage from the state constitution. Republicans are blocking voting rights proposals as well in Virginia, a complete mess in the Virginia State House right now. And the biggest bet in history, record 31.5 million Americans are gambling on the Super Bowl this year. How about that? The Olympics has found after 4 days 0 gold medals for the USA as our disastrous Olympics continue. The House on Tuesday passed bipartisan legislation. How about that? That would make long-sought financial and operational reforms to the U.S. Postal Service, which has struggled with pandemic-induced mail delivery delays. The bipartisan agreement would overhaul the Postal Service and its long-eluded lawmakers, but they got a bipartisan vote. We'll see what happens when it makes it to the Senate, where everything goes to die. The Oscar nominations are released, and you can go look them up because you got Google, but the Best Picture nominees are Belfast, Coda, Don't Look Up, Drive My Car, Dune, King Richard, Licorice Pizza, Nightmare Alley, The Power of the Dog, and West Side Story. I think I heard of like 2 or 3 of those. A lot of people were pissed off that Don't Look Up got nominated for Best Picture. I don't care about such things, but I thought I would include it in the news dump. And also, North Korea saying it could shake the world with a missile at any time. So it's always fun. They are gloating on Tuesday about the country's possession of missiles that should be able to hit the U.S. They continue to threat international peace and security and the global non-proliferation regime, according to a State Department spokesperson. Basically just constantly desperate for attention in a world where there just isn't enough. All right, well, that's all I've got for you on the news dump today. How about it? Let's get to the guests, shall we? Got two excellent guests joining me. Eric Segall coming up. Had almost a 45-minute conversation with him about the importance of the decision of the Supreme Court about Alabama's redistricting and just how bad the gutting of the Voting Rights Act has meant for so many states across the country and what it portends for the rest of us and the future. Really important conversation with Segall today. But before that, I caught up with the great Wajahat Ali. It's Waj Wednesdays, everybody. His new book is out. He's been out there promoting it. We always have great conversations. He, of course, now a columnist at the Daily Beast. You got to check out his new book. Go back to where you came from and other helpful recommendations on how to become American if you haven't bought it already. Love this guy. He's become a really close friend of mine. We had an amazing conversation, as always, at Wajahat Ali on Twitter. Here we go with the great intro jingle, another one by Gareth Sever.
He's Wajahat Ali. Got a book that comes out the 25th of January. Go back to where you came from. Do you mean where he got his name from? Lego abilities amaze until his wife stops his spending spree. He'll dismantle your political stance on a Zoom call in his jacket, shirt, and tie, and his underpants. His powers of thoughtful discussion bring nuanced perspective that can't help but draw us in. It's Wednesday. Time for Wajahat Ali.
I love it so much.
Never gets old.
I love it as much as I love you.
That's a lot of love, sir. I appreciate the jingle. Yeah, I've always wanted, my own soundtrack. Either for walking into a room or even if I'm getting beat up. I feel like it just adds, and that's flavor to life.
What kind of a morbid desire would that? How would that even come up? That there's music to the violence that's being caused to you.
It's like wah, wah. Instead of that, it's like war. What is it good for? That's like this song. Just to create a contrast as I'm getting beaten down.
Have you ever been beaten up?
When I was, it's a story I mentioned in the book. Pardon me for the shameless plug. I promise.
We're going to talk about the book
in 2 weeks. I was 6 years old. It was first grade. I was this brown-skinned kid at James Leach Elementary School, trying to hang out with the cool kids. And there was this guy whose name was Ryan. I called him Chad in the book, just to not get sued. I don't even know if he's alive. The lawyer is like, you want to change up the names? I'm like, I'm pretty sure Ryan's probably old and doesn't remember. I don't even know what his last name is. So I call him Chad in the book. So this guy was forged from the Aryan Promethean gods. It's what Ted Cruz wants to be, right? And so he was this white kid who had a crew, and there was one Latino kid in the crew, and one day they're like, come with us to the field. So I'm like, yay, I get to hang out with the cool kids. And then the white kids made the Latino kid punch me in the stomach, which I thought was a great microcosm of how minorities advance in America. You kind of have to earn your stripes by beating the marginalized group. And I think the Latino kid was like, I'm sorry, man, I don't want to do this. I'm like, why, Latino kid? He goes, I got to think about me, bro. And he just hit me in the stomach. And then I remember another time, Tom Fay, who's a friend of mine, I pissed him off because I used to annoy him. And in 7th grade, one time he just turned around and goes, punch me, man, let's fight. And then he tried to take a punch at me and barely hit me. And I got so surprised. I punched him, knocked him out on his ass.
Oh, wow.
I know, my left hook, man. I'm a lefty.
Right. He didn't see it coming. What about adulthood? High school, college, after?
Went to all boys Jesuit Catholic high school where we were kind of like priests. There were no women. And I don't know if I haven't done any research on this, but the lack of women, instead of making us into these depraved, vicious beasts, we became kind of neutered monks in the sense that we were even the kid who probably would have gotten beaten up kind of got the pass. So there weren't really many fights. And then UC Berkeley, I don't know, man. I didn't really piss off too many people. I guess it's Berkeley. So that was back in the day where I could openly pray. And people would be like, oh, he's doing Tai Chi. No one would care. They're they will step over you. Literally, this was pre 9/11, even post 9/11, which just shows you how things change. Even post 9/11, I felt comfortable praying out in the park with a bunch of brown folks and nobody would care.
Yeah.
In fact, in 2022, I'll be honest with you, and I've talked to other Muslims about this, I feel less comfortable praying publicly because just with the comments, the stares, and any potential backlash. Isn't that wild?
No, I mean, it is wild, but it is. I'm unsurprised. I mean, that's where we're at. We're in a cold race war, or a hot one, it would seem. I mean, like any kind of diversity is being targeted, and the whites are the victims, and it's really,
Well, I think you're being oppressed because you can't say the N-word. So that's why I feel really bad for white men.
I say it all the time. I don't know.
Except Pete.
I'm always, comedian Todd Lynn used to have a joke, unfortunately passed away, about how he thinks there should be a room, like a padded, silenced room, soundproof room, and you can just like send the whites in and they can just scream it and get it out of their system.
So I have this joke, which I can't tell, but maybe you can riff on it because you're a comedian. The representative of the blacks, and they can choose a representative, and then a representative of the whites, and I think Megyn Kelly, because she comes in hot to defend, Santa Claus.
Yeah.
They meet at Appomattox Courthouse for the release or surrender of the N-word, and they negotiate terms. And essentially, black people are like, okay, we'll let whites say the N-word every Tuesday and Thursday from 12 to 1 in their car with the windows up for 1 hour. In return, we get voting rights.
Done. That joke gets to the greater point about what is and isn't the worst type of racism. Someone spewing hatred at you at the grocery store or in traffic is not, people think, well, that's what really bothers, minorities. You really got them with your, but you ask folks, I can ask you, any minority, what would you rather? Would you rather be called a name, or are you more concerned about a law that minimizes opportunity or puts you in danger or takes your vote away? Everybody's given the same answer on that. One is far worse than the other.
Yeah, and also what also goes to show you is it reveals why perhaps people need to invest in some CRT learning.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. Like, why do these double standards exist?
Or just diversity, inclusion, and CRT is a legal constraint. It's great to learn about all of that, but like just the idea of you could dumb it down and say, this is why you need to read this book. So you see the experience of a young black boy in the South or whatever it is.
Yeah, you become more curious. You become a better informed person and a citizen of the world. It actually helps make you smarter. You don't have to change your opinions. Like, I took world religions in college. It didn't make me change my religion, but I'm like, oh, this is what people believe. These are their traditions. I'm a smarter, better person for this. This helps me in my social relations. This helps me at work when I travel. I can actually engage with people. People say, oh, he's an informed person who's respectful. It helps me get the color that America is obsessed with, the color green, right? It's so fascinating Black History Month is off to a smashing start. It's like you got the Supreme Court saying, hey, blacks in Alabama, we're going to go after your voting rights. Then you got Whoopi Goldberg, who's in like friggin' the View suspension jail. She's like in jail, like, but I apologized. Joe Rogan. Meanwhile, like you got all these whites playing their violin for Joe Rogan, who still has a Spotify deal. You got this black woman who's getting a 6-year prison sentence in Tennessee because she didn't know this archaic law for voter fraud. Meanwhile, you got Glenn Youngkin's son who tried to vote twice deliberately. Nothing happened to him. Oh yeah, and you got book bans, and like we said, we're like, hey man, the CRT ban, I'm telling you, it's going to be bad for all of you. And they're like, quiet, darky. And now you got feminist books banned, LGBTQ books banned, and you got Mouse, the graphic novel about the Holocaust banned. It's all the same. It's all about restriction. America cannot expand. If it expands, they're going to take away power from me. And then the Warbelots and the whatchamacallits are going to replace me. And we got to ban everything.
Well, wait, who are the Warbelots? I actually am.
That's the name I always give myself. It's like a token white. He goes, this goddamn Warbelot always whining and complaining about white supremacy. You know, like his name was Wajahat, whatever whatchamacallit.
Oh,
just shut up.
Got it. No, I thought you meant the Warbelots were going to be moving in, and I would have told you I'm actually uncomfortable with them.
I mean, who are the Warbelots?
Well,
these Warbelots.
That's a really well framed, pal. I love the way that you're saying. I mean, but that is exactly what's kind of unfolding here, and it's the fear. The whites are so afraid in my town. You've seen these laws now being passed that talk about the sensitivity, and you don't want your feelings to be hurt, and you want your kid to feel guilty. And of course, that kind of rhetoric is so weird when the same type of people are calling us snowflakes and cowards and all of that, and saying that we want to, cancel them. They're getting rid of books and teachings because they're worried about the kids. My answer to that is always, if your kid feels guilty about being white, that's not the school's fault. It's not the teacher's fault. It's not a book they read's fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. You're a bad parent. If your kid feels bad about being white, you just talk to them for a little while, and they don't have to feel that way. No one's teaching that. So what do you say?
I've never been taught that in my life. Never been taught ever. Ever. Like, hey, white people, time to feel guilty. It's like never happened, ever. And so it's an interesting thing. It's all about projection, right? They call us snowflakes, and they want safe spaces, but it's safe spaces for them, no safe spaces for us. Civility for them, and cruelty for us. Free speech so they can say whatever they want, but if literally we say stuff they don't like, they'll ban the books. And that's kind of how like white supremacy contorts itself. It's like Cirque du Soleil gymnastics. It will always evolve and mutate and contort itself in any way, shape, or form to stay in power. Like Republicans were all about law and order until January 6th. And now, what do they call them? Ordinary concerned citizens, right?
Political
you're
discourse.
All about democracy. Yeah. Legal discourse. Yeah. Or what was it called? Legitimate discourse.
Legitimate political discourse.
And that was the RNC. It's not just like a nut, like, Lauren Boebert. That's the RNC. And so, when I was saying this on your show for years, I was talking to someone else earlier today, Farai, African-American female host of an NPR show. When we were talking about this in 2016, I can't tell you, man, everyone's like, you Muslims and you blacks and you darkies always whining and complaining. We're in a post-racial society. Trump won't win. The guardrails will keep him in check. And look at the guardrails now, man. This is like, I've said this before on your show, the death rattle of white supremacy has turned into a death march.
Yeah.
It's happening right in front of us.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I'm fighting it in my community today on Facebook. But
what do they say?
We just have a situation in our district and in our school where there were two young people who got in a fight, a white girl and a black girl. And so there's a narrative out there that's completely factually wrong. And I've been, advocating and trying to work with this family. And it's been, the idea that a white child, a white kid, a white person is attacked by black people, which of course that happens. Of course, black people fight with white people and white people fight with black people. But usually, crime is between two people of the same tribe. It's always been the case, but it happens. The point is, when it does happen, if you see a video of black people beating up a white person, that will go viral from Matt Drudge to Glenn Beck to Sean Hannity to all of the rest of them. And then they will point to a systemic issue. Look at this. And it goes wild. And so
look at their culture.
Yeah.
Where are the dads? Look at the genetics. Why are they more predisposed to violence?
Yep.
Look at chaos in the urban neighborhoods.
Yep. And
the double standards are also at play, right? With the N-word and Joe Rogan controversy. We have the right. We should be able to say the N-word, but you can't teach books by black or brown authors. The double standards. The Spotify billionaire is like, I'm going to give Joe Rogan $100 million, knowing full well who he was.
Yep.
And then I'm also going to give $100 million to all of you darkies. We're like, great. All of us get $100 million.
Yeah, that was the bizarrest. Yeah, I haven't quite, it looks so bad. I think that kind of a thing. It's like the NFL putting end racism in the end zone, but not do anything. I mean, he has whatever that fund or whatever they're giving that money to. I haven't vetted it out. I don't want to be too critical of it, but it doesn't make up for if you're part of the problem. If you're spreading drugs in the community and you're also funding a drug rehab, then what are you doing? What's that called?
Apparently you're the godfather. That's what you are.
Yeah.
You're a corrupt patriarch of a criminal organization, right? And no one wants to see that. Like that's the white supremacy has both mothers and fathers, man. It has deep roots and tentacles. And the interesting thing about that is when people say Black Lives Matter, well, look at that. One white man's life and voice and right to free speech is the same as apparently all black and brown people. It's worth the same, right? $100 million. How much does Black Lives Matter? It doesn't. Brown lives, black lives, pain, anxiety, elegy, doesn't matter. That's the thing. It's like the rest of us always have to police ourselves and hold back our rage and anxiety to placate white anxiety. And I was talking to someone else about this earlier today. It's like,
yes,
it's the only way you can do it. It's because it's one of those things, like, we can't afford to say F it. We're just going to go on our own. We can't. So in order to change those policies that we were talking about, you have to win over enough whites. And in order to win over enough whites, we have to placate your discomfort first, just to get you enough to listen. That's the dance.
And even then, we're not going to, we appreciate it, but we're not going to go out on a limb for you and be in any way uncomfortable. Because, I've got all kinds of people doing shit to me and saying shit to me now that I've gotten involved in my local community. Like, I'm out there and now I'm getting calls and, a threat from a lawyer and all this stuff. And it's not, and that's not fun. And that's why people don't want to do stuff. But the point is, you have to go so much further than being placated, than being, having your feeling. By the way, when you say that, it's like, I so often see people of color use some type of phrase, especially on social media, with like, I'm exhausted. It's so tiring. And part of it is not only the constant threat and abuse and fear that for example, right now, how many threats have been called into historically black colleges, universities? That's exhausting.
That's another one.
That's exhausting to have your school be bombed. But in this case, you're saying it's also exhausting to have to placate and take care of the white feelings in this case.
So you have to defend yourself from these constant threats, right? As you have hate mongers and racism and microaggressions and macroaggressions and policies that literally like attack you based on your skin color and ethnicity and your gender. Then you have to live your life, because we're all human beings. So that's also that during a pandemic, live your life, work, try to have stability and happiness. And then you have to prove your moderation, your loyalty, your patriotism to an often skeptical judge, jury, and executioner that no matter what you do, it still holds you as suspect. That's like what Toni Morrison said, right? Like, you always have to defend your civilizational worth, your capacity, your abilities. And then even then, it's never enough. But even if you succeed, I become the magical unicorn Muslim. There's only one of me. And then they're like, can't you replicate? Can't you be like, gremlins and just replicate? If I gave you fried chicken after midnight, can there be more of you? Well, and I'm like, no.
Well, I think what you're saying, though, is also, pushes... It counters the idea, the point that everybody can defend themselves. Some minorities, if we're talking about, gay people, whatever, they have the resources, they have the ability, they have the skill set. But I would argue most probably don't. They shouldn't have to, but they don't have the ability to. And so it's not that they have to live with every day that they have to defend themselves. It's that just knowing that every day you're on a tightrope. Every day you have to be scared. This is obviously how a lot of women worry in terms of sexual assault and so on. Every day you're walking around thinking that somebody is coming for you. I've never, ever had to feel that way except for at one black wedding. And it was irrational. I was being ridiculous.
Why? What you're like, I can't say the N-word here. What happens if I say the N-word?
That was my main concern.
It's going to come out.
I whispered to the groom. I was like, hey, listen, quick question. Am I allowed?
And then he's like, no, Pete, but on my table, I heard 3 black people drop it. How come they can drop it? And you're like, why are you at my wedding?
By the way, that was the initial fight between these two girls. That the one girl was a Trump supporter and they got in an argument and the white girl started arguing, allegedly, why can't we say the N-word? That was the initial beef.
I completely believe it. I'm oppressed for not being, and I think that's why there's dark humor in my comedic setup at the courthouse of Appomattox, but it's exactly that, the loss of power. You have taken away from me this beautiful weapon that I was able to employ to dehumanize you. And how dare you take away my ability to say this? I can't have it. And like black people are like, listen, I guarantee you black people are like, all right, if you want the word, let's just replace stature and power. You get to be black and I'll be white. And they're like, wait.
Rating places. Easy. All right, before I let you go, I thought I'd spend more time on this because I'm super interested in it. Your book came out last week. It was released, not last week, a couple weeks ago now, January 25th. Go back to where you came from and other helpful recommendations on how to be American. Of course, we've talked about it a lot here on the show. But I just want to know, like, How's it been? I mean, you were on so many shows. You're on this tour. You're doing a whole bunch of things. I know you're still obviously, as anybody, concerned about going out because of COVID, especially with your daughter. But I mean, you've been traveling. You've been doing a ton of shows and book and readings and stuff. Give me some highlights. How's it been?
It's been good. Look, it's painful in the sense that because of COVID and Omicron and because of my daughter's situation, I had to cancel most of my tour and make it virtual. And I had set up really good tours, man. I had set up like awesome, like friggin' shows at each city. And the one I got to do was New York, where I tried to like subvert it. And instead of just focusing on me, I did like this multicultural talent show. And I had like a singer and a comedian and a panel, and Preet Bharara came, and it turned out to be awesome. And that's the type of spirit I wanted to share, the spirit of the book of that. It takes
that's a great idea to do instead of the traditional.
Well, that's what Preet said. Preet's like, I didn't think that would work, man. But usually I just do one-on-one, but this worked. I came out blabbered for 10 minutes. I did a dramatic reading with Aparna Nancharla, who's a comedian. It was fun. I got a live musician, then I did a comedian, and then we did a pretty funny panel that I moderated. So that was what I wished would happen. Unfortunately, with the pandemic and Zoom, it kind of gets robbed. But I kind of self-engineered a lot of this stuff. And I got like a lot of these TV hits and the stuff that I've been doing for 15 years. You call in favors, and then people read the book. And then this was the biggest surprise. People are like, oh, the book doesn't suck. The book's very good. The second surprise from people is like, I thought the book would be angry. I'm like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I thought it'd be angry, but it was actually really funny. And the third thing that I think is the best one is that people said, oh, the book ends on hope, and I needed it. And so I think this combination of these blunt truths in the book, which I deliver, plus humor that they were not expecting, like they were laughing out loud, and then the fact that there's hope at the end is an interesting combination that has really affected folks. And the word of mouth on it, I'm really you never know. You throw something out there in the universe, but the word of mouth and the reviews are like really good, man. Like apparently, I don't know anything about anything. My publisher's telling me about book publishing, but they're like, dude, you're at 4.6 out of 5 on like Amazon and Goodreads. And for a book like yours that is blunt as it is, the fact that you have such a high consistent rating is a sign that it's resonating with people. So that's nice. Well,
you've got a massive following on social media, and I think that the book that you wrote is very eminently readable and approachable. It's an amazing cover. You've been doing this really fun thing, which anybody who writes a book should do, and like sharing photos from different bookstores that you're getting or seeing, airport bookstores. And I love that. And I kind of am comparing it with all the other books. I'm like, it really pops. It really pops the book cover, which I know that shit matters a lot, the placement and the cover. And I think that you've just done a great job from start to finish on it. And obviously everybody likes you and wants you on their show. And so, I mean, how many shows would you say you've done, like podcast, TV shows, radio, whatever?
I'm still at it, man. I'm still at it. Like I got to finish out the month, but like, I think like 18 now, maybe, or 15.
Wow.
And then, you know how it is. Like I got on Morning Joe because Kat, who's a great producer, who I'm sure you know, she called and she cared about the book and she cared about the themes of the book. She's Asian American. And I did her a solid one time, and I came on and she used her equity to give me 5 minutes. I just came on, and I think maybe it's my age, or maybe it's the pandemic. I just kind of took over that set for like 6 minutes.
Smart.
But it really was great TV.
Smart, because if you don't, he will.
Yeah, and I just made jokes, and everyone kind of like
smart.
Reverend Al was there, and then Willie was there, and we talked about football, and I talked about like being an immigrant, and then Mika mentioned that she also wore husky pants, and like if you bring that type of spirit, and I think you bring your A game to these TV shows, you know this, at the end they want good TV.
Yeah.
But the more important thing is we were able to talk about the themes that we mentioned on your show on that type of a platform where, let's be honest, they don't have these blunt conversations.
Not enough, that's for sure. Not everywhere you go, people like you. It's always been the case, and I'm just so excited to see the book finally come out and see you get all the attention and respect that you deserve. I hope that it sells millions of copies. I hope that it beats Laura.
So too, man.
I hope it just beats Laura Coates is really all. And Ellie
but Laura has that CNN swagger, man. So Laura, see, I'm a young CNN. I was only there for a year, so that Laura, she's got a one leg up on me, but she's a good egg, so I'll give her. I beat Preet, so that's all that matters.
Oh, great. Yeah. And it's because really all that matters is competition. I think.
In the battle of South Asians, there can be his Highlander.
Right.
There can be only one. So I have to kill him and absorb his powers.
Do you think the whites or even the browns hold up like your book, Wajahat Ali's name, and then like, somebody else that's clearly a brown name that you probably know. And they're like, oh, I can only take one of these. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
They're like Sanjay Gupta or Warbalat. Go with what you know. We'll go with Sanjay. And the other one's like, I want to risk.
I think in the end, they probably, which one of these guys is more handsome in that case?
Sanjay has abs and works out.
Is that right?
Yeah. Oh. He's got abs and he got like that. He has got a good skin regiment. I'm just trying to survive, man.
Has your ego been, though, under control throughout this whole thing?
Oh, yeah, man.
Have you really gotten out of control? I'm hearing that you're getting really out of control.
No. I got 3 kids who don't give a shit that I released a book.
Yeah.
And my wife doesn't care at all. And you got to cook and you got to pay the bills and your parents keep you humble. And, I'm just grateful. At the end of the day, I'm 41. We've talked about this before. I never thought I'd be alive to see this, to be alive, to see 41. And then to hold your book with your name on it. It's a very humbling, gratifying thing. So I don't think you can afford to be arrogant. I just feel like I'm very grateful and lucky.
I sometimes feel it's condescending for me, in this case, to say to you or anybody to say to somebody else in this kind of relationship, I'm proud of you. But I do want to say,
I appreciate it.
But I do want to say, like, I'm proud of you. I'm proud that I'm your friend, but I'm proud of you for so many things. But this book is the culmination of all your professional work. It's an amazing accomplishment, and I'm so happy for you, and I'm so proud of you, and I love to see you everywhere, doing everything, and everybody talking to you and about the book, and I'm very excited. And I will say I get a little jealous sometimes.
It's good. It's good. Yeah. Be jealous of the brown skin. You should be jealous of my hair that I still have, and I'm jealous of your ability to say the N-word.
This is going to get chopped up by somebody. And
no, they'll get it. Thank you, man. As always, thank you for the love.
Thank you very much, buddy.
I wish. Sorry that I wasn't able to come on regularly. It's just been
no
crazy
worries, dude. I'm. Take all these opportunities when the book comes out to promote it as much as you can. You will always have a place with me when no one cares anymore. On the way down, you'll be hanging out in the shed.
That's where we'll end up anyway when the whites turn on both of us. You for being a race traitor and me for trying to implement Sharia.
Yeah, it's just so you know, I can't even make this joke. We'll protect your family until they come, and eventually I'll have to sell you out. But
yeah, eventually. But just get like a good piece of meat for me, because it'll be bartering by then. Like money won't mean much, so just get like half a bear.
I can't. It's too much. It's too sad to even imagine, and I'd probably take a bite before I even hand it to you.
So. It's like. Oh, I miss him. Oh, it's a good bear.
Bear? All right. Thank you very much for joining me, and congratulations, pal.
Thank you, sir.
There he goes. Wajahat Ali. Go get the book. Follow him on Twitter. Let him know you heard him here on the show. Always makes a huge difference when you contact the guests. So thank you to all of you who do on a really very regular basis, and all of you who listen on a regular basis. Now subscribe if you haven't already, so I can keep it going. StandUpWithPete.com. All right, now it's time to get to my second guest. He is a regular here on the show. He's a constitutional law professor at Georgia State University, the author of 2 books, Originalism as Faith and Supreme Myths, and also hosts a podcast called Supreme Myths as well. You can follow him on Twitter at eSpinSegall. He's even on TikTok, ladies and gentlemen. We talked all about the case out of the Supreme Court case on Alabama. I earlier played that clip from Elie Mystal, but the 5-4 decision restoring Alabama's congressional voting map, which also restores Jim Crow if you decide you agree with Elie Mystal. All right, here it is, Eric Segall and a great jingle by Pete Coe to get us started.
And knowledge and gloom and a guest house too. He's got a Labrador dog, glad to give you a poo, 'cause he's the legal eagle.
Eric Segall.
Eric Segall.
All right, here now to talk about this case I just told you a little bit about, which I'm sure you've been reading about, is the legal eagle, Eric Segall, who is not happy about this decision.
Oh, man, I am not happy. I am happy that I saw you in New York last week. That was
very fun. We had a great time together, having brunch with the ladies, and it was a lot of fun.
Yes, and I was in a really good mood, and then I got home, and then this disaster happens. Let's start with this, Pete, at a very high level of generality. You and I have been talking since 2010 when we met about how there is this conventional wisdom out there floating around, or used to be, that even people who don't like the Supreme Court and disagree with certain things think at least the court has been good on race, or at least the court protects, minority rights. No, they don't. No, they haven't. And there's a long history of the court getting in the way of achieving more racial equality in this country. So before we get to today's case, that's yesterday's case, let me just say, the year is 1883, and Congress has passed a law, believe it or not, prohibiting racial discrimination in restaurants and hotels. This is Congress's effort to kind of end Jim Crow before it began. The court strikes that down. And then 17 years later or so says that Louisiana's separate but equal law, putting blacks and whites in different places on public transportation, is constitutional. This notion that the court has been good on race is a complete and total fabrication. It comes from a misunderstanding of Brown versus Board of Education, which we won't get into today, but the court has consistently now, since 1857, when it stopped Congress from ending slavery in the territories based on no legal arguments at all, the court has been terrible on race forever over
What
time.
are the arguments? The arguments that many make are that the court has done things to create more equality.
But they haven't. And there were about 10 years, maybe 15, during the Warren Court, where the court did do some good things. Brown symbolically was a good thing. Obviously, it didn't do anything on the ground. You and I have talked about how Brown is 1954, 1963, 9 years later, according to data compiled by Professor Gerald Rosenberg in a book called The Hollow Hope, and other people. In 1963, America, in 12 southern states, 9 years after Brown, public schools were still 98.2% segregated. The court did not end segregation. The court told school districts to end segregation with, quote, all deliberate speed, which meant no speed. It wasn't until Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the wake of JFK's assassination and Lyndon Johnson's ability to control the Senate that the Congress got in the act and told states they would lose federal money if they continue to legally segregate under the law. That was what stopped.
Right. So it was legislation.
Yes.
That created actual consequences for a Supreme Court decision.
Yes. Yeah. The court has made affirmative action more difficult. Of course, everybody knows about Shelby County versus Holder, where the court gutted the most important part of the Voting Rights Act. Recently, the court has interpreted the Voting Rights Act in ways that make it much more difficult to prove racial discrimination. And then it happens yesterday.
So what about this? That Shelby County was 2013,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And the idea that the Supreme Court is doing or not doing the racism. Elie Mystal tweets, it just has to let the racism happen by pretending the 14th and 15th Amendment don't exist. That's what it did every day from 1877 and 1954, and that's what it's done every day since 2013. I
would go. Elie's right about that, but I would go further. But let's talk about yesterday's case, because yesterday's case is a great example of the horribleness of all of this. So the first thing that even, non-lawyers or non-law professors, that people can understand very quickly, is that everybody knows, because we've talked about it, everybody that listens to you knows that I've been saying since we met that Chief Justice Roberts had it out for the Voting Rights Act, which he gutted in 2013, since 1981, when he was a young lawyer stud at the Justice Department, working for the Reagan administration, writing memos that said the Voting Rights Act isn't needed, it's too broad, it's an intrusion on states' rights. So Justice Roberts has been the leading Supreme Court justice against voting rights of anybody. And yet yesterday in a voting rights case, he joined the liberals and dissented in a case with the 5 Fox News justices on the other side. That tells you right away something is really wrong. When Justice Roberts is saying the court is interpreting the Voting Rights Act incorrectly or hurting voting rights too much, we know we've gone off the deep edge, because no one believes. I mean, when I'm about to, this next sentence is just not controversial. Justice Roberts is was until yesterday the leading opponent of voting rights in this country of any person on the Supreme Court in the last 50 years.
That's quite a statement. Quite a statement.
It's true. Well, I mean, Pete, it was his agenda. Just like you and I've talked about this before. Just like Justice Kennedy was the leading proponent of gay rights and wrote all 4 gay rights opinions in history protecting gay rights, because Justice Kennedy had a thing about that. Thank goodness. I mean, thank God for all of us that Justice Kennedy has some personal experiences that made him want to be the guy to enforce gay rights in this country. One of the good things Justice Kennedy did, obviously, in my opinion.
What personal experiences? I never heard about that.
We've talked about it. His father was a very prestigious lawyer in Sacramento. His father had a very close friend who was a very prestigious lawyer in Sacramento. That close friend was like an uncle to Justice Kennedy, not by blood, and that guy became dean of a law school in California. That guy was gay, but closeted, because we're talking about the 70s and 60s. And Justice Kennedy saw the indignity this man had to live with by being a closeted gay man, even in California, but back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we know that's the tell. Well, by tell, I mean, we know that's why Kennedy felt this way, because in the case where he wrote an opinion striking down state laws banning same-sex marriage, he talked a little bit about equality. He talked a little bit about rights, but you know what he talked about mostly, Pete? And you know how he ended the opinion? With dignity. The idea that gays should be able to get married because it accords them the dignity they deserve. And it's well known that that comes from his relationship with a man who had to live in the closet for 30 years. So my point there is Kennedy had it, on the right side, you and I think, for gay rights. Roberts has been on the wrong side of voting rights long before he became a Supreme Court justice. So yesterday, here's the case. It's called Merrill versus Milligan. It's a case out of Alabama. And it's not a constitutional law case. It's not a constitutional law case, at least not yet. And I want to emphasize that. It's one thing, why the reason I responded to at least tweet the way I did to you is, it's one thing for the court to be totally insensitive to race under the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which it has been, Ellie is right, since forever, other than a short period of time during the Warren Court. But that's not yesterday's case. Yesterday's case, is a statutory case. It's a case where Congress acted to protect Black Americans. And basically what the Voting Rights Act says that's relevant to the case yesterday is when states redistrict, they have to take into account the idea that blacks have been excluded from the political process, from 1868 until basically the 1960s. So Alabama has to redistrict in a way that creates the potential for what are called majority-minority districts.
Right.
Where a minority has a good chance of electing somebody. And of course, redistricting happens every 10 years after the census. And it's really important how that's done. And there's a lot of rules about it, not created by the Constitution, but created by Congress under its authority under numerous constitutional amendments. So this is a statutory case. So and the way it works in election law cases, Pete, this is important. Sorry, that's Sweeney barking. But that's Sweeney barking for reasons I can't understand. He's mad that Lucy has his bone.
Oh,
Sweeney,
I thought
go
he was
get
mad
it.
about Robert's decision.
He's definitely mad about that too. So basically, in normal cases, you have a trial in federal court, then a court of appeals, and then less than 1% of those cases go to the Supreme Court. But in cases involving redistricting and some other election issues, you don't have that system. You have a different system,
right?
Where you have a 3-judge lower court, and it's not one judge, 3 judges, and then if there's a direct appeal to the Supreme Court, so it's streamlined, it's faster, and also, I think this is a good idea, you have 3 judges doing the case, not one judge, because these cases are so freaking important, right? It's about voting in elections and who gets to run our government. So this 3-judge court in Alabama, 2 Trump judges, Pete, 2 Trump judges. unanimously held that Alabama violated the statute, not the Constitution, the statute passed by Congress when they created one majority minority district in Alabama when they should have created two. Now, the law on that is hopelessly complicated and it will bore everybody. I don't want to go into it. All we need to know is 3 judges, 2 of whom were Republican judges appointed by Donald Trump, not by George Bush, not by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Said what Alabama is doing is illegal. And then they said, go back to the drawing board and redraw the maps. Okay. So that's what happened.
The panel threw out Alabama's new map, which included only one congressional district with a majority of black voters, even though they make up more than a quarter of the state's population. That's just a really important point that is probably the rest of it starts to get confusing.
And by the way, this is happening all over the country where the idea is to pack and crack minorities. Packing means you put them all in one place, or cracking means you disperse them widely.
And by putting them in a place or dispersing them, let's be clear with what you're saying in terms of drawing a map around where they live.
Exactly.
You're not moving them physically to different.
No. You're drawing weird maps so that the maps kind of go in and out, and and of course, white legislatures, Republican-controlled legislatures, want to have blacks have the least amount of voting power possible. But the Voting Rights Act, a federal law that is, that Congress passed under a lot of different authorities, says, no, you can't do that. And then creates a whole bunch of complicated rules involving math and numbers that we don't want to talk about because it's math and numbers.
Right.
But forget what Segall thinks. Just throw what Segall thinks out the window in this case. 3 judges, 2 of whom were Trump appointed, unanimously said Alabama is doing what Alabama's been doing since 1868, which is discriminating against blacks and doing terrible things to blacks. So that's what happened. Now, the law on that, according to Rick Hasen, who you and I both agree is one of the leading experts in the country on election law, is very complicated and maybe could use some refining. All right. So I'm going to concede that point, that however you make the determination that Alabama should have done it differently is difficult and complex and maybe should be refined. All right. So what the court should have done is said, okay, we'll take this case.
The Supreme Court.
We'll take this case. Justice Roberts, in his dissent, said the lower court judges did it right. They followed our law, but our law is notoriously confusing, citing experts. We should make that law less confusing, but we should still let Alabama go back and redraw the maps in accordance with the lower court's ruling, and then we'll decide this in regular process. In other words, we'll grant certiorari, there'll be briefs, there'll be oral arguments, and we'll give you our answer a year from now, either this June or the following June or whatever. But in the meantime, this is the important point. In the meantime, the maps are illegal under our law, as it currently is, and Alabama should be forced to make 2 majority-minority districts, as the district court said, the 3-court judge. Instead, the 5 Fox News justices stayed the court's decision, meaning froze it, said Alabama can use the old map that's racially discriminatory under federal statutes, and we'll issue a decision on this case a year from now or whenever, briefs and oral arguments. But in the meantime, Alabama can use the old map. And they did that. I'm very clear about this. Kavanaugh wrote, there was not a majority opinion for the 5 Fox News justices, but Kavanaugh and Alito wrote an explanation why they voted the way they did. And they explained there's something called the Purcell Principle. And to understand this case, you have to understand the Purcell Principle, which is very easy to understand and makes a lot of sense.
It's Bill Parcells, coach. He says that you should always stack the defense with the secondary.
Don't trade Tom Brady. That's the Purcell Principle. Don't trade Tom Brady.
Self-perception.
The Purcell Principle says that as a general matter, just not clear, hard and fast rule, but a general matter, courts should not require states to draw new election maps or change election rules. Usually it came up with election rules like voter ID requirements right next to an election. It's not fair to tell Georgia a week before the election, what you're doing is all wrong. Change it now.
Right.
And that's fair, right? We agree on that, right? That's fair.
Sure.
But first of all, that principle has not traditionally been applied to redistricting cases. But I think it could be. I'm not suggesting it hasn't, so it shouldn't be. Pete, Alabama drew this map, in the illegal map, in 1 week.
Right.
And there were months before the election. So what Roberts was really upset about, and again, remember, if Roberts is leaving aside the three liberals who also dissented, if Roberts is upset about this, we know something terrible is going on. Roberts says that principle doesn't apply here. The maps were drawn in a week anyway. Well, Kagan said that, but he said we shouldn't apply that principle here. There is plenty of time for Alabama to do a legal map instead of an illegal map. So that's the bad thing about that's the current terrible thing, that now Alabama in the next election in 2022 gets to use a map that is clearly violative, in my opinion, of federal law, because it only does not create enough majority-minority districts as required by the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
But Pete, what's coming is even worse. So all of that's awful. But what's and what's coming, Roberts is going to go back to Roberts. When this case comes down eventually on the merits, finally, final decision.
Well, this decision was done. This was a shadow docket thing. Where
it was, but I don't think it's fair. So I'm trying to be fair. I always try to be fair on these things. The shadow docket's a real problem. The real terrible problem. This is not really an example of that, I don't think, because the court had to do one of two things. It had to either, uphold what the lower court did or stay what the lower court did. In most shadow docket cases, what we're talking about is the court reaches out to do something it doesn't have to do. It could just wait. Here, Alabama needed an answer. Either we change the map or we don't change the map. I mean, so I don't. That's can we bracket the shadow docket, because that's an important issue. But not
just want to just remind people. Just take a moment to do a live read. The Supreme Court had dismantled Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which required federal approval of changes to voting laws in states and localities with a history of discrimination. Of course,
Alabama.
That Alabama and many others, Texas. But that pissed off Ronald Reagan and everybody on the right. And Justice Roberts is a young buck. He was brought in to basically begin the dismantling of this. I mean, the arc of his career and the success with which he has had dismantling the signature legislation of the civil rights movement. I mean, I just have to really always remind myself and folks, when we're talking about this, that people fought and died and marched and organized for a generation to accomplish this, and the Shelby County decision dismantled it, and then it's been dismantled further. Go back to where you ever want to pick up.
Yes, first that was well said, and again, it emphasizes that if Justice Roberts is on the liberal side of a voting rights case in dissent, we're in big trouble. Like, we're in deep shit.
Well, you were about to say what this portends.
So again, now I want to be clear with your listeners, who I think understand that I try to be as honest and transparent as I can about my knowledge.
Some of them think you've sold out to the corn lobby.
I know a lot about election law. I do not deem myself to be like a leading expert on election law. I think I'm a leading expert on some things, like Justice Scalia, originalism, that kind, constitutional interpretation, maybe the First Amendment.
The rules around cycling and public roads.
Earl Monroe, Billy Joel. But what I'm not, among law professors, I would not be considered somebody who you go to talk about election law.
Okay, well, I'm going to you to talk about it. I've got you here now, So
no, what I do is I go to the people I think
sure
on election law.
Sure.
And that's among others, a guy named Derek Mueller, who's actually pretty moderate, maybe even conservative, and a guy named Rick Hasen. And Rick is known by liberals and conservatives as the leading election law, and you've had him on your show before. Anyway, so Rick has been warning about this now for a year. Like what happened yesterday, Rick has been warning about for a year. This is what he's really worried about. It makes me really worried about it. I think Rick is right about this. I've done my own research. So there's always been this weird tension. This is going to be a little technical, but it's really important. There's always been this weird tension between the Voting Rights Act's requirements that states take certain steps to make minority representation better, right? Which is noble, a good cause, most of us think. And the conservative courts, this is not the liberals, it's only the conservatives, the conservative courts' desire to end kind of race-based electoral fixing. Or choose any race. It's like an affirmative action thing for elections. And the conservatives are very skeptical of that. So on the one hand, in the Voting Rights Act, Congress says to states, you must take race into account to make up for the past. In another, and that's a statutory thing, it's in the law. In another line of cases, the court has been very critical and skeptical of doing exactly that as a constitutional matter, saying Congress doesn't have the power to do that. Now, they're wrong about that. So bastardization of constitutional law, constitutional interpretation, and the whole purposes of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But so far, they've let the Voting Rights Act go in that sense. In other words, they have allowed states to use race to some degree to make majority-minority districts because the Voting Rights Act requires it. Justice O'Connor was one of the leading justices on this, and she always said, more in dicta than in holding, in other words, more in cases where it was just an aside.
Thank you.
That complying with the Voting Rights Act would serve as what we call a compelling state interest to justify race-based districting. Without the Voting Rights Act, maybe states couldn't do it. But with the vote, the whole key here is Congress represents the fucking people. In theory, we elect Congress. Congress decided to tell states, use race to get past race. Use race to make it more equal in this country. Use race to make sure North Carolina did not have a black senator from Reconstruction until the early 1990s, when the Voting Rights Act case required North Carolina or a black representative.
When you say use race, you mean create laws that affect people, white folks and black folks, differently.
When I say use race,
and you could use it for good or bad, I suppose.
Of course. When I say use race in this context, what I mean is this. From 1910, every 10 years there's a census. And after the census, there's redistricting based on the new numbers that come in. 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, what states did, Pete, and this is not a matter of opinion. I'm very clear between opinion and facts. Like, my opinion is Billy Joel is great. That's an opinion, not a fact. What I'm about to tell you is a fact. What states did is they redistricted in a way that after the black migration to the north following World War II, the black migration from the south to the north in places like Chicago, Boston, even faraway places like Seattle and whatever,
right.
Detroit, and then Detroit for sure. What states did is they let rural counties have much more power than cities. Why? Because rural counties were white and cities were black. And a whole mess of things were done in the 1960s, including the Voting Rights Act, to try to undo that overt racial discrimination.
Yeah.
So the whole purpose of the Voting Rights Act is to make sure. So a good example is Tennessee. Imagine that I'm making the numbers up, but the point is clear. So like the 1940s and 50s, after the black migration, imagine Nashville has, 100,000 total people and a large percentage of blacks. They get one member of the House of Representatives. Now imagine a rural county that has 20,000 people. They get one person in the House of Representatives. Well, that's not fair. That violates one person, one vote. And you don't give 100,000 people one person and 20,000 people one person. Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And that was all done based on race. So there are two ways to deal with that. As a constitutional matter, the Supreme Court issued a decision in the 1960s saying one person, one vote. And then Congress got in the game and said, not only is one person, one vote, as said by the Supreme Court, but you have to make efforts to district in a way that is fair to blacks. that gives blacks some representation because they were getting less than of course, blacks are a minority, but they were getting less than their minority numbers would suggest because states were giving rural counties much more power than cities. And that was true in Georgia when it comes to Atlanta, in Tennessee when it comes to Memphis and Nashville, and even places like, Illinois when it comes to Chicago, Massachusetts when it comes to Boston, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the Voting Rights Act was meant to deal with that. Now, what the court is likely going to hold in this case, and this is what scares Rick Hasen, going full circle, and this is what scares me, is they're going to say, absent provable intentional racial discrimination, which, Pete, in 2022 is very hard to prove. You're not allowed to take race into account in redistricting. And that will destroy majority-minority districts. By the way, who's the guy at 538?
Silver.
That guy. I was just reading a tweet thing of his that's complicated as always with him, but basically makes this point that the future of majority-minority districts is very uncertain given these 5 Fox News justices, plus probably, frankly, Justice Roberts on the merits. So Roberts' objection to this, by the way, was procedural, not substantive. In other words, he said... Go ahead.
No,
he said the law's messed up and we're going to fix it. What he means by that is they're going to take race out of the process, which is a terrible idea. He just thought they should have let this case go until then. You know what I mean? He would have said, under the current law, the 3 judges below did the right thing. And Alabama should, for this election, have to create 2 majority-minority districts.
Yeah.
Now, when the case eventually gets argued on the merits at the end, in some June someday, Roberts is going to side with the Fox News justices because he hates voting rights and always has. This is a country change. This is potentially a country changing event.
How is it country changing?
Because take Georgia, take where I live, for example. When the Georgia legislature redistricts, it's complicated. By the way, I'm not suggesting this is easy. Because you think about Georgia, there are an enormous number of minority, not just blacks, by the way, people of color in general, a lot of different people of color in the Atlanta metropolitan area, which is huge, right? And then there are not very many people of color in rural Georgia. So you have to draw the map in a way that takes all of that into account. And the Voting Rights Act said, when you do that, you have got to make sure there are a sufficient number of majority-minority districts to make it fair. The Supreme Court is going to say that's unconstitutional. And that's a disaster. So that we have 13 districts now in Georgia, and I think there are 2 or 3 majority-minority districts, give or take. There may be none. Who knows? I mean, if the Voting Rights Act were to be declared unconstitutional in that way, I think the Georgia legislature would pack and crack Fulton County, where I live, which is the Atlanta area, in a way that would just be a disaster for everybody.
That wouldn't affect statewide elections, would it?
No, it affects
congressional districts.
On the federal level, it doesn't affect the Senate, of course, because 2 senators from every state.
It doesn't affect the governor, where Stacey Abrams is running,
yes,
right?
It doesn't affect governor, but it does affect the Georgia House and Senate.
Right. So the state houses are what matter. So even if you get a Democratic governor.
And Pete, there's a whole plan coming here, So what the Supreme Court is also likely to do, I don't want to, I'm going to stop calling it a Supreme Court pretty soon because,
what will you call it?
I don't know, the Supreme Fox News, because the other side of this coin, which you and I talked about a lot back during 2020 election, is the Supreme Court is going to transfer power away from governors to legislatures. And that's going to create havoc in the 2024 presidential election. And that's too complicated for this morning. But all I want to say about that is that what we have are 5, probably 6 Republican justices who are doing all of this for partisan political purposes to strengthen. Now, you and I discussed before how political scientists, not law professors, think that 98% of them think that Supreme Court decisions that are important, that we care about, are based on partisan politics. And I've always rejected that view, Pete. My view has been Supreme Court decisions are based on the values, life experiences, and politics of the justices, of which partisanship is one factor.
Right.
But there are many other factors.
Right.
For example, Justice Kennedy, a completely loyal Republican in every way, who voted in every voting rights case ever for Republicans, his views on gay rights were not partisan, right? They were much more aligned with Democrats than with Republicans.
But based on his life experience.
Exactly. And so we have Justice Souter, a Republican who was a liberal, Justice Blackmun, a Republican who was a liberal, Justice White, who was a Democrat, was conservative in many ways. That's all gone. That's all gone. There are no more Whites and Souters and Kennedys. They're all gone. And these 5 justices, plus Roberts, their number one priority on the court is to maintain the strength of the Republican Party. And I'm guessing, that I'm sure about. Now, what I'm guessing about is, and they think it's even more important now. So it's interesting about Trump, where Trump fits into this. I don't really think any of them like Trump. I just can't make my heart believe that. I just can't. But what I do believe is what they think is that Trump is on the verge of destroying the Republican Party. So it's even more important to them that they strengthen the Republican Party. Does that make sense? In other words, they see the Republican Party at risk. Which it is, I think. Don't you think so?
I'm not sure how. I'm not. Yes, I don't know. I think that analysis of him destroying the Republican Party further.
I'm not saying destroying. I'm saying putting it at risk.
I'm not sure what that means. That's political analysis, but I don't know how they think that they can somehow strengthen the Republican Party.
Well, one way by doing that is to make sure more Republicans get elected. And that's what this case yesterday is about, Pete. It's about more Republicans. It's not about, race. It's not, I'm not, let me be clear.
You're saying that are you saying that the destruction of the Republican Party, meaning that if things were fair and districts were somehow fairly drawn, the policies and behaviors of the Republican Party would never win elections. And so since they see that they can't win elections because they have no ideas and they're really just bad in so many different ways, they've got to just change the system so that a minority of crazy people can make decisions.
Okay, that's a nice statement. It's much stronger than I would have said. And that's politics, which I'm not going to say I'm an expert on. What I am saying,
they have no good ideas, and they have it for almost forever.
I defer to you on that. Okay. What I'm saying,
you agree with?
I'm going to go. This is how far I'm going to go on this. I don't think Justice Barrett and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. I do not think this about Alito and Thomas, but I think Alito and Thomas. I can't say what I was about to say. I'll be canceled. I don't think that Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and even Roberts. I don't think, and Barrett. I don't think those justices are sitting down going there, I want to hurt black people. I want to help white people. That's not what they're doing. That's not what this is about. What this is about is people whose entire lives were formed, advanced, and encircled by the Republican Party. And the normal state of affairs, according to 98% of political scientists, and according to Sheldon Whitehouse, the senator who's gone around the country for years now saying this, and me as an expert on the Supreme Court, I'm telling you this. Partisan politics plays a big role in Supreme Court decisions. But there are other things too. But today, partisan politics is at the very top of their list. So, for example, Sheldon Whitehouse has created a set of videos and briefs he's filed in the Supreme Court where he has claimed that since 2006, when the Roberts Court began, there have been roughly 75 cases involving voting rights, elections. We're not talking about affirmative action, guns, and abortion here. We're talking about cases that affect elections and voting. And Republicans have won every single one. Now, I think he's wrong about that. But I don't think it's 100%. I think it's 98. I think it's 98%. Doesn't matter, right? That 2% doesn't make a difference.
Do you agree? Do you agree with the following statement?
Yeah.
People need to stop saying that conservatives on the court are like Jim Crow. We are beyond that now. Now the court is just doing what the court did in the Jim Crow era. It's just the same. All that's missing is the violent vigilante enforcement of those rulings.
Right.
The court is just doing what the court did in the Jim Crow era. Is that disputable?
And in some ways, it's worse today. I think that statement I think that line now on the ground, of course, blacks are better off today than in 1890. Like, we can't debate that. That's not a debatable thing. But there are two ways that statement you just read understates the situation. One is they should know better today, right? I mean, the justices of 1890 came of age in 1850 when slavery was a thing, right? So I'm not saying it's an excuse, Pete. I'm just saying the time does
the perspective matters.
But, yes. But in fact, right before we started taping this, I'm writing an article about Justice Scalia saying what a racist, sexist, homophobe he was. We have to judge Supreme Court justices by the times in which they lived. All the justices that we honor, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who's like my favorite justice, 1920s, whatever. We have to judge them by the values of the times in which they lived. It's not fair to ascribe 21st century values to Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1910. It's just not fair. But Scalia's racism, sexism, and homophobism, that's a word, was in the last 35 years. We get to judge him by these standards today. By the standards of today, the court's even worse than the 1890 court because they should know better. But more importantly, it's incredible to me that the Federalist Society folks who so complained about judicial activism, in the 80s and 90s, and so complained about judicial overreaching in the 80s and the 90s and 70s, whatever, don't recognize that what the court is doing to the Voting Rights Act is such a terrible judicial aggression. Because if the people didn't like if white people didn't like the Voting Rights Act, and if white people thought it was helping blacks too much, or if white people thought we didn't need it, what could we do, Pete? We could repeal the Voting Rights Act, right? We have the political power, the majority, to repeal, change, amend, alter the Voting Rights Act. In 1982, there was the reason we have Justice Roberts' memo from 1981, where he's complaining about the Voting Rights Act, is because in 1981, there was a debate in Congress. Should we amend the Voting Rights Act? Because prior to 1981, the court interpreted it, I think wrongly, to only prohibit discrimination in voting that was intentional. What the Congress debated and then changed in 1982 was to say, no, it's not just intentional discrimination. If a neutral, non-racist motivated redistricting or election law disparately affects people of minorities, then it should be illegal. And that's a decision Congress is allowed to make under the Constitution. Roberts opposed that change. His memo was about, we should convince Congress, the Justice Department, not to make that change. But Congress made that change, Pete, in 82. It's in the law. What the court is going to do is say that part of the law is unconstitutional. That Congress doesn't have the power to punish states, punish is not really the right word, but to make states change their election laws if their election laws have a disparate impact on minorities.
Right.
And the reason that's important is because from 1870 until 1960, sometime in the 1960s, all the states did was pass election laws that made it harder for blacks to vote. That's all they did. So we have to, in this context, so we have to undo that. And that's what the Voting Rights Act statute was intended to do. What Rick Hasten is afraid of is on a constitutional matter, the court is going to say Congress doesn't have that power. That is a terrible decision if that comes, and that decision is going to really hurt the relationship between whites and blacks in this country.
Well, that is something that we're going to continue to talk about here. It's one of the most important things, and I think it's too hard to look away from. All right, before I let you go, can I ask you one more question to try to change the subject and bring a little levity?
Yes, please. We need levity this morning.
We are known for.
I'm sorry. Hold on. Before we bring levity into the conversation, I need to make one more point. I negligently forgot to make.
Oh, a little more doom and gloom here at the end.
Yeah, I'm sure. And this is the doomiest, the gloomiest.
Oh, good.
I had there's a publication called Roll Call that's like on the, you know, and they called me yesterday and I was talking to them and I made this point to them and they thought it was a really good point. And I think it is something we have to recognize, though it is doom and gloom. Sorry, Tina Winsett. The fact that the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, in a voting rights case where his allegiance to the Republican Party cannot be questioned, couldn't get one, not a single one of the other 5 justices to join him, which would have changed the result in the case yesterday because there were 3 liberals voting the other way. The fact that he couldn't convince a Barrett or a Kavanaugh or a Gorsuch. Alito and Thomas are lost causes, so forget them. But the 3 Trump justices, Barrett, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, he couldn't get any of them to go along with him is an incredibly horrible, ominous sign
right.
for gun cases, abortion cases, affirmative action cases, everything. I mean, Pete, I would have thought that he could have gotten one in a voting rights case, that he has so much credibility among conservatives in voting rights cases that he could have gotten one of those justices to go along. And he couldn't. And that's a terrible
I feel like
sign.
I should do a live read for Canada right now.
I'm sorry. I need to make that last point. Now turn to levity. Go ahead.
Okay, so here's the thing I was going to say. You and I love to debate and discuss and make anything an argument, especially when it's fun and not consequential. But here's something that I found out we're on the same page. We went to a diner in New York City on Sunday together. And, you know, traditional brunch-ish diner, I'll call it out. It's the Brooklyn Diner. And you and I were aghast at a missing menu item. Aghast. And I haven't stopped thinking about it. I seriously probably thought of it once or twice the last couple of days.
I woke up the next day thinking,
did you?
That is a scandal.
Did you?
This should be front page New York Times scandal.
And the issue was no potato choice.
No potatoes.
Call it whatever you want. Home fries, whatever you want.
Hash browns. What? You don't like hash browns?
Hash browns, sorry. But the point is that there was no choice. There was no selection. How do you create that menu?
You can't. And I want to say, first of all, it's a diner, meaning big, large menu with lots of items.
Not this one. This menu was not that extensive, and it was only breakfast at that point. Go ahead.
If you're going to serve breakfast I'm from Long Island, Pete. We famous for its diners, famous for its breakfasts. This is the Brooklyn Diner in New York City, not far from Long Island. You cannot serve a full. By the way, it was Sunday brunch, right? You can't serve a regular breakfast, much less a Sunday brunch breakfast, without either home fries, hash browns, or some kind of potato item. It was a disgrace. If I had known that, we never would have gone there.
Disgrace.
We agree. Now I'm going to tell you one thing that may spoil this entire attempt at levity, which is I need you to know something. Had there been hash browns, I would have ordered them. And then I would have poured maple syrup on them.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
That's what I do.
I got to go. Thank you for the lesson.
And you know what? Lynn and I were in the city for a few days. Excuse me. I got in trouble on Twitter for saying the city. In New York City for a few days. And on Saturday morning, we had a brunch with friends. And went to a restaurant and they had hash browns. And this is what I ordered. I ordered salmon eggs Benedict, which was really good.
Okay.
Salmon eggs Benedict with a side order of hash browns. And then you're going to hang up on me. And then I put the maple syrup on the hash browns. And the best part of that was that the maple syrup ran off the hash browns and into the juicy, wonderful hollandaise egg yolk.
All right. Listen, if I was with you, you know what I would have done? I would have stood up and I would have started screaming like you threatened my wife or my life. I would have said, "What is wrong with you? Who puts maple syrup on their hash browns? What kind of a monster?" And then I would have thrown my arms up and just run out and flip something over.
Even better than hash browns on maple syrup is when it runs off into the hollandaise. Oh my God.
Oh, okay. All right. That's enough. Thank you. You earlier you didn't say something because you were worried about being canceled. And here we are.
By the way, speaking of being canceled, just one more return to
like
seriousness.
You just got canceled.
And then I will let you go.
I'm taking this to social media before I even post this.
I had several friends this morning write me and last night in utter terror and disgust that the Georgia legislature is going to put up a statue to the still living and still serving Justice Clarence Thomas.
The Georgia Republicans want to erect a statue of Clarence Thomas in front of the State House? Or somewhere?
Yes. And they're going to do this. And the only issue for us, and this involves you, this directly involves you. Because I like being your con law guy. You have others too, but I like being your con law guy. I like being your Supreme Court guy. When I pelt that statue with eggs, Benedict with syrup on them, I will probably get arrested and no longer be able to serve as your con law person.
Well,
because I am so aghast.
The sentence will be harsher when they find out that you put syrup on it. Like, sir, the general sentence for such a crime. But did you put syrup on these? Wow, take him to the chair.
I can't believe they're putting up a statue of a living Supreme Court justice who might be the worst Supreme Court justice in history. I can't believe they're doing that. Yeah. It just drives me insane.
Well, we'll have to revisit that horror show.
Yes.
We were doing so well, and then you made it bad again.
I'm sorry. I will suggest to your listeners that until they try syrup on hash browns, they shouldn't mock it.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Love you. Bye. There he goes, and thank God we got rid of him after that. I mean, for those of you, there are two kinds of people, I guess. Those who like syrup on their potatoes. Sorry for saying it again to the other kind of people who think that is abhorrent and disgusting. Wow, something else. Which side do you fall on? Segall or mine? I'll put up a Twitter poll and we'll talk about it at tomorrow night's Hangout. All right, and that's it. That's all I got for you on today's show. Thank you very much to Garrett Saber, to Pete Coe, to John Carroll, and, of course, Eric Segall and Wajahat Ali. Thank you to you, most importantly, for listening and telling your friends. That's all the time I got for you today. I will talk to you tomorrow. I love you. Goodbye.
Causes for laws and sins that weren't even sin. They knew that change was going to come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.